was my fault, yes.
Yeah.
So my name is Ha Nguyen, and I'm here from the Washington State Community Tech Colleges. And I am a policy associate with efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Good morning or good afternoon. Rochelle Sharp. I'm Deputy Director with the Washington Student Achievement Council. We're a state agency in Olympia, and our role is to really work with the state legislature and the governor about what programs and policies will help increase educational attainment in Washington. And we also manage the state's financial aid programs, the College Bound Scholarship, the new Washington College Grant that we'll talk about today, and several initiatives to increase financial aid application filing, FAFSA and WASFA.
My name is Danica Martinez. I'm with Seattle Education Access, which is soon to be Northwest Education Access. So we support young folks between the ages of 16, 20 to 29, currently in King County, but soon to be in Pierce and Snohomish County. And all of our folks are considered opportunity youth, or folks who are on non-traditional pathways to pursuing higher education.
I'm Drew Hansen. I'm a state representative in Olympia. I chair the College and Workforce Development Committee. And I'm going to eat on this, so sorry to everyone on the don't look away. Like, look at other people, don't look at me.
Okay, so my first question I have for you is, what, in terms of higher education, what are the biggest barriers that we're seeing in higher education in terms, it could be in terms of access or just, just barriers all around for students, whether it's financial aid or just applying to colleges, knowing which colleges and the options that they have for them?
Well, I'll throw out a number to start with, which sometimes I think this surprises people, which is despite our amazing job opportunities in Washington, despite our amazing strong financial aid programs, we rank 45th in the country for the number of high school graduates who go directly to college. So students are not filing financial aid applications, and they're not thinking about life after high school immediately. So that's something we need to work on, and we're really focused on, is how to get more students thinking about planning for and preparing for and taking that one step of filing a financial aid application. So getting through the financial aid application would be one barrier.
I think I'm going to loop on to that and start with absolutely thanking Representative Hansen for his work this last session for the Big Washington Win, because what that did was allow our system to aggressively invest in a new statewide initiative called Guided Pathways. And some of the work that's led up to that, there's been pilot programs that have gone out, or colleges that have done it, the initiative in the last 2 years. But what this means is that there's going to be money to fund all 34 colleges to do this complete overhaul. And what we've learned by looking at the research is that at a system level, at points of access as well as retention through to 45 credits, and then to completion to a credential degree, there are vast disparities based on race and ethnicity, as well as low-income students. This initiative that will be supported by these new funds will completely change the face of the way we do our work and how we serve the over 45% students of color that come to our campus doors, and then specifically in the area that I live in our basic skills departments, 67% of the students that come through those front doors of our college system are students of color. So this work will be really integral, and we measure those points, momentum points of access and completion throughout, because our system has a incentive-based funding model that then incentivizes colleges to really focus in on the student population that we've done what I like to say the worst by. So those we know are students of color, low-income adult students.
There are a lot of barriers to higher education. And I think for me, the way I kind of think about it is barriers that seem kind of directly related to the institutions themselves, and then kind of everything else outside of that folks are dealing with on a regular basis. So all of our students are low income, and when you think about the trends in King County or Puget Sound, for example, low income students of color are the ones most affected by gentrification, for example. And so because of the housing shortage, the items in our communities that we might not think of as directly related to higher education are in fact major barriers to higher education, because our folks are thinking about housing stability all the time, and that connects to being close to the institution that you want to go to, or even being close to a train stop or a bus station, and having like the reliable place to go to do your homework. So there's things like that: housing shortages, childcare shortages, expensive public transportation, a complex like healthcare system, that's difficult to enroll in or to navigate, even if you have health insurance. So there's things like that we're interacting with on a regular basis, that I would say become heightened barriers for students as they're preparing to transition into higher education, and then don't go away once you're there. It's really hard maybe to be as successful as you'd like to be if you're worried about where you're going to stay at night, or if you're going to be able to get to the child care center to pick up your kids on time. And so there's a whole host of barriers that I think that our students are dealing with on a regular basis. And then I think at the institutional level, I think it's really encouraging to think about initiatives like Guided Pathways or the Seattle Promise, King County Promise, things like that. But I think it's helpful. It's also helpful to remind ourselves the ways in which higher ed institutions were designed, which was not for people of color and it was not for low-income students. And so those systems kind of are naturally a barrier for folks in terms of like jumping through hoops to get the financial aid that they qualify for, to have everything paid for. And so part of our job, or part of the roles of the education advocate, which is our primary direct service staff in my organization, is walking with students to the different offices and navigating the barriers that the offices are presenting for folks. And it doesn't mean that the staff at those institutions are not helpful or are not like keeping students at the center of their focus, but we're dealing with systems that were not designed for folks to access easily and succeed in. So it's little things of like making sure, trying to advocate that for all folks to be aware of how different policies are affecting undocumented students, and we can see inconsistencies from campus to campus or office to office. So in terms of the institutional level, there's so many different policies, and within the institution and outside, because of current political changes that are affecting students on a regular basis, and that directly affects them in potentially being successful in higher education.
I'm good. I don't need to talk. So.
Okay, so almost all students get accepted into community colleges. However, how accessible is community college for students in terms of tuition and fees, still? And I know that we have the new bill, which is tuition is 2 years free for students graduating from Seattle high schools. Is that correct?
Well, for my
Actually
one, it's
more.
like everybody. So Seattle Promise might be different. I don't, candidly, you all educate me about that. But for my bill, it's 4 years tuition free, taken care of for families making $50,000 a year or less. And then partial scholarships for families making all the way up to the state's median income, which is about $88,000 a year. So that's it's like $1,000 towards your tuition at the UW or WSU if you're a literally median income family, which is a lot of money. So with that, which comes in after, not to get sort of wonky, but it comes in after Pell Grants, right? So to what my colleagues are rightly saying, you can use that Pell Grant money to pay for housing, pay for food, pay for books, pay for the other things you need. Then you use the new Washington College grant to pay for your tuition. And so that's great, right? I mean, that's a massive equity investment for all students from families in the kind of 50% of median income or lower, and then a pretty decent equity investment for families up to the state's middle income. With that, for these families, we should have taken care of price as a barrier. And I think what you say is well taken, that there are a bunch of other barriers that are not just price. But I mean, that's such a big one. Before I got in the legislature, I was on the Community College Foundation Board in Bremerton, where I live, or in the district where I live, and that the cash was the big problem. Like people just not having $200 to do whatever their fees were. I mean, that was a massive barrier, right? So one of the things I feel like our role in the legislature to do is, to the extent we can, take care of that price barrier and send that clear message. Look, if college is right for you, don't let tuition stand in the way. We're going to help you, chase that job you want. If an apprenticeship's right for you, fabulous, right? We'll pick up tuition for that too. That's part of the bill too, because not everyone learns the same way, and not everyone feels like they're going to succeed at a four-year college. Fine, right? I mean, plenty of ways to get a job in this economy, and we all support people in all of them. So, but the Seattle and King County problems might be totally different and have different stuff. I don't know anything about it.
Just to build on that, because I think it's important to just take a moment and really understand how powerful what you just said is, because you explained it very quickly, but it is the most flexible, the most generous, the most diverse financial aid program in the country. And because of your leadership, it is something that we should it is something we need to just pause and say, wow. We know from the College Bound Scholarship, and I know many of you in the room are very familiar with the College Bound Scholarship, how powerful that ability to say to families, you can count on this. The state of it is predictable, it's understandable, and you can count on it. And now you can think about what else you need to do to prepare and get ready and get admitted, and think about the pathway. 66 institutions are participating. So it is certificates, it's expanded to apprenticeships, it's automotive tech all the way to pre-engineering. And comes in and fills in where College Bound is not able to. If you move to Washington as a sophomore, you're still eligible for Washington College Grant, where you may not have signed up for the College Bound Scholarship. And you mentioned coordinating with Pell and covering living expenses. Very generous, very flexible. So,
that was our, thanks for saying, first of all, thank you for saying me, and it was my bill, but huge team effort with a lot of people in this room, Bernal, Arlen, the rest of our team, all of our presidents and trustees, and tons of students made this happen, obviously. But it is, it is really super cool, because it's this giant infusion of cash into making college affordable for students who haven't had the kind of opportunities always in this country that other types of students have. And it's fully funded by an assessment on lawyers, doctors, architects, software engineers, financial professionals, the professions that depend on higher education. So we have that dedicated funding stream, which, Lord willing, is going to grow in the future, right? I mean, we're going to please, dear Lord, we don't hit a recession, but if that's going to continue to grow, we're going to be able to expand this to more and more families a little bit closer to the middle of the income stream. Yeah, so it's super duper exciting, right? It's not all the presidential candidates have all these free college plans, and they're all excited about their free college plans. None of them have any free college money, right? I mean, I think there's they think the Treasury's going to print magic free college money that they're going to use for free college, which I guess is what they do in DC, right? When they cut taxes, they paid for that with magic cut taxes money. So I don't understand what they do, right? We actually we got to balance on a 4-year basis. We got to balance our budget every year. We have this dedicated revenue stream by taxes on higher education professions that will hopefully make this live forever. And it funds not just the pre-college, it funds the Guided Pathways Initiative, which hopefully deals with some of the barriers you're talking about. So yeah, super exciting. Yeah.
And they're open to any Washingtonian, regardless of citizenship.
Yes,
that's
critically.
also an amazing.
Yeah. So that was a huge deal. So I personally looked at the language to make sure that was right, because I did the DREAM Act. DREAM Act 2.0 was my bill to do to open up College Bound for our undocumented students, and so we made absolutely sure that one was covered in this bill. So that's super exciting.
I worked on the front lines of a college for 13 plus years, and the financial aid office was right outside my back door, maybe 20 steps away. And it was such a complicated process that if I didn't think to walk a student, a brand new student who'd never been on college campus before, let alone know what to ask, if I didn't know the questions to ask, that would have left that student at a loss. And so much of the job was trying to figure out piecemealing money enough to get a student from quarter to quarter to quarter. And that gap when state need grant at the time ran out. If you weren't, knew exactly what you're doing to get on campus, know exactly who to talk to, where to go, questions to ask, that money dried up within the first quarter.
Right.
And it was gone.
Yep.
So the gap to fill between if they're eligible for federal financial aid with any other type of funding stream that came through the college, sometimes steered our students of color, low income, women, parents into pathways on the campus, programming into a trajectory of low income working jobs, which then ensured that their trajectory was stalled, that they were worse off than they were when they first came to us, because we ensured the pathway this way because of the policies around those particular funding streams. So I can't say enough about the impact this is going to have for all the students that come through the doors now. I'm just amazed by it. And as far as just to sort of step away a little bit about those populations who are coming to us who don't have a high school diploma, who do not qualify currently for federal financial aid. There's that ability to benefit provision that's not utilized across the system, because now a student who comes in has to either have a high school diploma or meet ability to benefit guidelines, which at least means 6 college level credits. Well, many of our students who come through basic skills, at 67% students of color, low income, come through, don't qualify. So we've got some innovative programming that we're hoping will ensure that these individuals qualify. We won't know quite yet if that's passed through at a federal level, but if a student is engaged in our High School High School Plus programming, that's shifted in the last year since the last session. High School Plus programming across all 34 colleges, or the iBest programming, which is a contextualized team teaching approach for our students. If they are in those 2 programming, we're hoping that it will allow for the ability to benefit provision to fall into place.
Perfect. So I have a question from somebody on our Facebook Live. So they said they really appreciate mentioning housing barriers. I serve on the Affordable Home Ownership Board. We often cite our construction projects in places where we are offered low or no cost land, which lowers our costs so we can build more homes. What access criteria do you recommend we consider to maximize access to higher ed when we're identifying potential donated sites?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, the question is, what access criteria do you recommend we consider to maximize access to higher ed when we're identifying potential donated sites?
I may not entirely understand the complexities around the source that individual works in. It sounds really innovative, but I think maybe what I would suggest is talking about adults in our communities that also want to return to college and complete a credential, and then they have the challenge of working and supporting their family, and then where the housing comes in, being close to where they live that is affordable. We're working with the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges and many of the 4-year universities to develop a recruitment tool for adults who previously started college and they didn't finish. And they have some credits, they have some momentum, but they need to return and complete, and they want to most likely stay where they live and continue with balancing work and family and affordable housing. So that it has the potential of really helping a lot of students come back and finish and get matched up with the program and the campus that's really thinking about adults in a unique way. And then they run into hurdles of, I can't get my transcript out of my former institution because I owe a parking fee. And so we're testing what we're calling a micro grant, which is a very small amount before a student even gets enrolled again. They're not even registered, but give them an amount to get through some of those financial hurdles that happen that are showstoppers for many people to get back on track. And we're testing that in Spokane, and then with the Seattle Community Colleges and their housing navigator with the Seattle Housing Authority, and United Way of King County that's come in and said, and we'll pay for things that the Student Achievement Council can't, like a financial aid overpayment or something that's standing in their way. So we're testing some innovative practices to come back and see, should we scale this? Is this really going to be helpful? And I think housing comes up, kind of pivoted and didn't quite answer the question.
So we've talked a lot about just all these different scholarships and grants that are coming out now. And I know you mentioned some low numbers in students/families applying for FAFSA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that all of these different programs require applications and whatnot. Is there any legislation or any programs that are going to be developed in the near future to help students and families? I know that it seems like a lot of the barriers we've been talking about relate back to financial barriers. And I'm wondering if there's going to be help for families and students to be able to understand what they're getting into when they do these programs and scholarships and understand how to fill them out.
Well, I know Danica has a lot of real experience about what works for students and families, but to kick that off, we have this amazing opportunity with the passage of the Washington College Grant to message to students and families, the funding is there for you. You have to get through this application so that you can access it. And so it starts with why should I think about completing my education? What's the value in that? Is it really going to be worth it? And then it gets into the how to get through the FAFSA or the WASPA. And we have some funding that we were provided to expand what we have previously called our 12th year campaign, which is working with partners, getting financial aid experts in a room and a computer lab to get some help to get through the financial aid applications, either FAFSA or WASPA, and also have an opportunity to do some advising about all the pathways that are available. So we're going to start with laser focus on the class 2020, because those high school seniors are going to be filling out the FAFSA here next month to be ready to go to college when it's a guarantee, and simultaneously working on returning adults that I mentioned. So we're working with a marketing firm, we're developing messages, and we're developing a campaign, but then we're going to work with partners such as Seattle Education Access, Gear Up, TRIO, all the partners that are out there, CERC, that are working with students and families and will know how to get and be that trusted partner that can work with communities.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think what always comes to mind around financial aid or funding application completion, and because it's what our program centers around, is the follow-through that's necessary, the follow-through support that's necessary for students. There was some folks in the room might have heard of the Let Us Succeed report that was released by the Community Center for Education Results recently. It indicated that 96% of students want to go to college. So there is this, I think sometimes there's this idea that low income or particularly students of color or working students are not interested. That report clearly shows like the need is there, the want is there, folks know that they want to go to school. But the report also indicated that they did not have access to the one-on-one support with adults in their school. And that's really what's required in order just to make sure that not only do you fill out the FAFSA, the WASPA, or workforce funding that you're eligible for, but that the chances are there's going to be follow-up paperwork that's required. And you don't get your funding unless you do the paperwork. And it usually involves like several meetings with whoever's providing funding or going to the financial aid office. And when we think about barriers to higher ed in general, I think the other piece is just the whole set of terminology that's used around funding in higher ed institutions, and that is, that's a new vocabulary specifically for first-gen students of color, low-income students. And so I think the messaging is really, really important around this is what's available, this is why you should utilize these opportunities, but then the follow-up support from institutions and adults in the K-12 system, from CBOs and from higher ed institutions, the coordination of all of that, I think is required in order to support students from enrolling in college to actually graduating with some type of degree or certificate.
So the superintendent thinks, well, shouldn't take words out of his mouth. The superintendent is inclined to explore the idea of mandatory FAFSA or WAFSA filling out in high school. I'm not totally clear how good an idea this is, to be honest, but I'm more than open to it. Reuben Carlisle of the Senate had thought about doing that some years ago, but I mean that's like, y'all are right. Like the fancy new free college grant, right? That's no good unless people fill out the FAFSA. And if we are that, and everyone says we're really low comparatively in FAFSA completion rates. So we have some money in 2158, the bill for Rochelle's Army to do that. We had a good discussion with one of our labor partners yesterday. He said, you got to get the WEA to make this a priority, like along with, it's not a core wages and benefits issue, but the WEA, they make things priorities. They're not core wages and benefits issues, right? And so to the extent that people are talking up FAFSA completion, I mean, these are people who are actually in the schools. Obviously, that's huge. And I think we're getting a little bit just the kind of the big flashy news of this bill and free college is itself helping people, helping people. I feel like what I'm hearing is it's helping people within this K-12 system start thinking, okay, so let's start, like what you're saying about one-on-one meetings with people, making sure there's follow-up, making sure FAFSA is filled out. And the reason I say this is anecdotally, a friend of mine who's a high school counselor said they had the big high school counselor meeting recently and everybody was just talking about this. So great, right? I mean, that's a way to change the conversation and really focus people on, okay, to get the money, got to fill out the goofy form, it's not obvious, let's figure out different ways to do that.
So we fixed a big problem this last year, right? And it's really music to my ears. But there's also a systemic problem, I think, and that's with folks that are like DSHS. And sometimes people who are on DSHS who want to go to college and are ready to go can get penalized if this side of the system gives them money. So I'm looking at representative because there needs to be some kind of communication between the state agencies that find these serious-minded students that have, and they're usually single mothers with children, but there's fathers also, that want to attend college, have the wherewithal to do it, and then are kept back because if they get this money that we're talking about, they can get penalized over here with their food stamps or TANF.
Yep.
And you all know that, you're all shaking your head. So systemically, we need to come in and straighten that out now, because we straightened out this side of the house, which is the higher ed side of the house. And now we need to go into the system and say, okay, system, we really want to put people to work. Here's a way to do it. And it might take 4 years, to get through this maze, or less, depending on what the program they go in. But let's give them adequate money to be able to go through it and not penalize them for having a threshold that they have to meet.
You're absolutely right. The governor has the anti-poverty reduction workforce, and really when you think about all of these programs, it's really poverty busting programs. And you've read our mind a little bit, because the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges, the Student Achievement Council, and Department of Social and Human DSHS services met to say, what can we do as state agencies to improve our service to mutual clients?
Yes.
We don't do a good job saying to TANF recipients, you're automatically eligible for full Pell Grant in WCG. And there are some programmatic sharing, but we can expand that. And it came out of our interest in serving adults and learning about Start Next Quarter, which is a tool that the community colleges use that's electronic to share eligibility across programs, regardless of who might administer the program. We have a lot of work to do, but at least those
Right.
data sharing conversations are starting.
Because daycare is a big
Yes.
money
Mhm.
issue here. I mean, if you have three
Absolutely.
children
Yeah.
and you have somebody who wants to go to college, each one of those children it'll cost what, $2,000, $3,000 a piece to go to
Yep.
daycare?
So we put some money in the big bill to expanding,
Right.
working in extra childcare for working students. There's a lot more we could do there.
Yeah,
You're totally right to
Yep.
identify that as a major issue. Like,
and not to get penalized if
sure,
they
yeah, fair point.
do
Yeah, yeah,
get
yeah.
that,
Yep,
right? That's
yep,
what I'm saying.
yep.
I think that's.
Yeah, you're right. Right on.
Yeah, it's a setup. I worked for 10 years under the workforce policy piece, working specifically with TANF students that came through our doors.
Yes.
And I still think of it as my favorite example of systemic racism, because all of these agencies had a hand in it. So
Mhm.
DSHS, ESD, the colleges, we all came together, CTED, CTED at the time, all came together and made sure that we funneled these particular students into the lowest paying jobs we could even think about.
Right.
And at the time, it was a one-shot deal. If a student came to me, they would only get one shot at schooling, and if they, for some reason, were forced into CNA, that's all they got.
That's
They
right.
could not come back until the tipping point research came out of our office that said 1 year at least,
Mhm.
minimum,
Mhm.
or else we're doing more harm. So that expanded that 12-month training limit, which now hopefully has been expanded to the 2 years, which is what I would call tipping point 2.
Mhm.
But we all had our hands in it. We're complicit into driving these students this way. And the research that we found was primarily those students that came through these funding streams.
That's right.
And I think the other way to think about that too is for folks who are interacting with multiple systems and who are low income and folks of color, what it equates to in terms of accessing higher ed is that those folks have the absolute most hoops to jump through to accessing just even being able to register for classes. So when you think about folks who are middle and higher income, they are going to the cashier's office and paying, just paying for their classes, or their parent or their grandparent is going online and paying for that. That's the only thing that they have to do to make sure that their classes are paid for, and then they have access to everything else in the campus. When we're thinking about, folks on TANF, they're like making sure that they're not like working too many hours to like jeopardize, other benefits, and having to fill out multiple applications to see like what are all their possibilities for getting their education paid for. But it means lots of time. It means taking time off of work. It means like making all these other sacrifices that really just like add to like a long list of things where it's like, this is you, these are your identities, these are all the other hoops that you have to jump through just to like start day one with a college class. So it's really the opposite of an equitable system. Even though like we I think we like to think these systems are set up to provide benefit for folks. It's not equitable in the long run at all.
You all hit it right on the nose. Thank you.
I do have just a couple of questions, and I want to open it up because it seems like a lot of people have questions. A bit from just this conversation, the difference between a community college application and a four-year college application are pretty different. I'm wondering with Seattle Promise, College Bound Scholarship, Washington College Grant coming forward, I would hope that there would be an influx of students who want to attend college who now have that opportunity. Do you think we'll see the application process for a community college become more rigorous and in the future due to these like influx of students?
No.
Perfect.
No, I mean, the college admissions applications are really not that different, right? Who are you, what's your background, and what do you want to study? The entrance requirements, how colleges choose to admit students are different, right? We know it's a little bit more there are more requirements to attend a 4-year college or university. But what we've seen with the College Bound Scholarship, which I think it's really important to look at that as we're launching Washington College Grant, is that 2/3 of College Bound Scholarship recipients are students of color. 2/3, 35% Hispanic, Latino, 8% African American. It's like it's our tool in our toolkit for all of the issues that we're talking about. And now Washington College Grant, the toolbox just got 10 times bigger. So then what are we doing early? And that's the beauty of College Bound starting in 7th grade, to start thinking about what classes do you want to take. And regardless of what your career might be, you have so many options available to you. You can study close to home, you can attend a community college, you can go further away, attend a 4-year college. It just depends on what's right for you as a student. So the pathways, that's another just amazing aspect of our financial aid programs, is it's not pigeonholing students on any particular pathway. That the access and choice is based on other factors. How far away from home do you want to go? What are the other costs besides tuition? What does the rest of your financial aid package look like? And what program do you want to study? How big do you want your class to be? Do you want to live on campus? Do you want to live near home? It's just, there's a lot of other things to think about. Luckily, it doesn't have to be so narrowly focused on price as it once was.
All right, well, I am going to open it up if anyone has questions. We'll go first.
I might have 2 or 3, but related. First question, this morning we were doing voter registration in Seattle Central, and Eric had spoke with a young East African man who was detained for 5 months and was seeking asylum, and then is now going to the community college and wanted to have help to get their citizenship. And one of the questions we were struggling with was, is the public charge issue going to impact people who are seeking federal financial aid? And so he's going to connect them with NWER, but that's a question we've been having since this morning. And the second question is, as students are getting into college, what is the state doing around the issue of the textbook prices? Because I remember when I was going to school, we were copying each other's textbook. We were not going to pay $97 or $150 for a textbook. And is that going to be decreased? Third question is, it's really crazy to hear that coaches are getting paid more than $1.5 million. Now, I think personally that money should go to communities of color and students of color to be enrolled. What is the state doing around that issue? Because that's a disparity in salary, but also really affects the way resources are actually maneuvered to support low-income students as well, in my opinion.
Thank you for asking such simple and straightforward questions. I would like to take the first one, please, which is we have guidance from all the state agencies, have guidance from the governor's office, and the answer to the public charge is absolutely not. And that state financial aid is not a benefit that would be affected under the public charge rule. So I wanted to answer that one. And you talked about open source textbooks and ways to reduce costs in textbooks. Lots of different ways that you can reduce costs now with renting and using open source textbooks, which varies different by campus, but with financial aid, books are considered a cost as part of what financial aid will cover. So even when, for a particular program, the textbook costs are there, the state financial aid will help. I don't know if you want to add to that, the good work you've done.
So our system has a what we call WACSA, and it stands for the Washington Community Tech College Student Leadership Group. So these are student leaders across all 34 of our colleges, and they, I think in the last session, had a legislative agenda that included a bill towards open ed resourcing on all of our campuses. So, from my understanding, that's going to be moving forward in this next session as well. So that's a huge push from our system to have that available as an option. As far as the public charge piece, I know messaging from our office to all the deans and directors of the basic skills divisions across all 34 colleges, were given that very clear message of no, it should not impact you. Because I know we got a lot of response from the field because students were afraid to enroll in classes. So hopefully we've been able to shift that narrative to ensure that it is a safe place to come in and enroll.
I can do those in quick order. Sorry, sir. Let me do it real quick. Obviously, state gets to set its own rules regarding financial aid. So the good news is, right, we're decoupled from whatever the public charge structure is. Kind of just like we tried to decouple our financial aid from DACA when we did DREAM Act 2.0, right? We didn't want to be at the mercy of DACA going on or off, depending on court decisions or the administration or whatever. So we tried, very intentionally to not import those concepts, right, into the Washington College Grant. On the second one, the textbook industry is a racket, right? I mean, this is like a cartel. It is predatory. And we do not have a handle on it yet. We've had a number of bills over the years. We've had a bunch of transparency bills. So now in course catalogs, if there are free or low cost resources, there's a little note in the catalog as it comes in, so people can pick things with free or low cost resources. We've tried to encourage development of open education resources. So copyright free open education textbooks with grants. We still don't have a handle on it. I mean, we just don't, right? And I haven't it's frustrating because different legislators have looked at it, and I don't feel like anyone's really gotten their arms around it, and ideally someone will, but we keep trying different things. We don't have a handle on it. It's a horrible industry. This move to digital textbooks where they have a code that expires after 1 year, right? You can't even sell your book anymore, right? It's just it's so bad. So, I mean, you're right to identify it. We have a good charge on it. And for athletic salaries, I mean, it doesn't shock my conscience we pay Coach Peterson $1.5 million if that athletic department is making money, right? If the athletic department's making money, it's a net contributor to the campus, great, right? Because that's money that then can go to support amenities for all students students who even aren't athletes. What is a problem, and I think this is going on at Washington State University, is when the athletic department is a net taker from the rest of the university at a significant scale, right? If it's a little bit, you're like, well, one of the services you provide as a university is athletic opportunities, okay? Just like we don't expect the writing center to turn a profit, we don't expect the athletic department to turn a profit, but it shouldn't be sucking giant volumes of cash away from the main campus. And I'm hearing from some of our Eastern Washington legislators that at WSU at least it is. Okay, so we're gonna try to figure out how bad that is and what we can do about it. So you're right to raise it. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on your question.
Thank you. Whatever we invest in education, we are investing not only on individuals, we are also investing on the future of this country, regardless of what race we are. One thing that there are so many barriers for communities of color, because the institution was designed in a way to encourage colored people to be. One of the things that we are not focusing here is we are only talking about those people who apply to the college. But what I am concerned is students who are in high school that they didn't get enough support to finish or to complete or to encourage them to participate in higher education. So we have to invest more on high school so that we can increase the number of students. One. Second, you had the current fiasco in higher education. Rich people, they try to manipulate the system. And imagine how many kind of students who are able to get in to those big institutions were left out. Are we immune here in Washington State for such kind of scandal? And the third one is that I live in Shoreline area, and in the Shoreline School District, the racial and social justice is a little bit, the teachers, they don't have even curriculum. They didn't even go to the racial and social justice system. So I think as a curriculum, it's nice to encourage students to go through this. There is a curriculum that's designed to create a harmony. So because most of the things that's really happening is in high school. So this is also part of, it affects the students of color. On the third level, there are a lot of hungry students University of Washington certainly been working to minimize this. And if there is some way, if we have left aside money for those students who are going full-time, and if they can eat breakfast or lunch, at least 1 meal a day, and that's also something that we have to look for. Thank you. Can answer as a policy, that would be great.
I'm going to do that in reverse order. On the last one, there are a bunch of campus level initiatives around hungry students. WSU has this Cougars helping other Cougars. We have a great bill by Representative Deborah Entman, one of my vice chairs, to specifically target emergency aid, right? Create a fund for emergency aid for exactly stuff like that, right? Because you're right, massive issue, giant issue in the culture, therefore giant issue on the campus. Your third one, the racial social justice curriculum, I don't know anything about the K-12 system, so I'm basically the wrong guy to ask. Maybe someone else can reflect on that one. The second one, the scandals, the admission scandals. So those are prosecuted under federal fraud charges, right? So that's already criminal. Having said all that, the California legislature did pass a package of bills specifically designed around that I'm looking at. I don't know how many of them kind of we need to do, or even, I mean, my sort of instinct is, given that this conduct is criminal anyway, you probably don't need to do a lot else, right, to make it more criminal. And boy, everybody now knows it's real illegal, right? I mean, like that was good. Like, you just send that. Just send a real message on that one. And then your first one on students who don't graduate high school at all and don't even get the chance, that's obviously right to focus on. I mean, the legislature just dumped something like $13 billion additionally into the K-12 system over the last 4-ish years as part of the McCleary, the McCleary decision, the big school, contempt financing. My hope is we see improvements in outcomes, right? As we are paying educators more, so they're more inclined to stay in the classroom as opposed to doing the various other things that they could be doing. We will see better student retention outcomes. Same with, we've reduced class sizes in the early grades. Well, that's supposed to, everyone says that's good, right? I mean, my kid's kindergarten teacher said that's good. Like, hopefully those sorts of investments make a difference. Now, can we do more, like, particularly around special education? Yeah, absolutely. But there's, like, the K-12 system has seen this helicopter drop of money, right, in the last couple of years. And I'm hopeful that we'll actually see improvements of outcomes because of that. But then I'm not a massive K-12 scholar, so I'll defer to anyone here who kind of knows that better than I do.
I don't have any policy recommendations or anything like that, but I think that I'm grateful for your comments, because I think that what's helpful to think about in terms of allowing folks from all communities to access higher ed is using a lens that's meant for targeting the folks who are the most disenfranchised always, right? Because if you're doing that, then those strategies will work for everybody. That also means a strategy that's equity-minded or anti-racist focused. And I think that there's different focus groups and studies that have shown that students in the K-12 system are hungry for culturally relevant curriculum. And I think there's folks actively working on that, how to spread awareness about that and support teachers in developing or just utilizing curriculum that is already developed. But I think to go even a step further with utilizing that same equity or anti-racist lens for talking about funding is not something that I can say that I've seen before, and it seems that we should be doing that because it makes sense to spread awareness with counselors and teachers and folks working within the schools. And the students are a great audience to receive that information, but it's not counting the folks who have already been pushed out of those systems and are working in low wage jobs or are trying to get back to be connected again to finish a diploma or a GED and then transition into college. And I think that the strategies for encouraging folks to apply for funding and utilizing the Washington College Grant should be targeted with those folks in mind, because that means that you're reaching the folks who need it the most, versus aiming up here where those folks are going to get that information if it's presented in high performing high school classes, for example. Those are not the most disadvantaged students. It's important, and I think we need to reach all audiences, but I think that an equity lens is really important for even the smallest of strategies.
Well, the reason I brought this question was currently I'm glad to to tell that circle is a signatory for the 1,000 initiative. And we've been challenging after the governor passed, with a green light, and there are some outside forces who are challenging for it. So it's kind of, attack every direction and everywhere. So.
So I'm on the Tukwila School Board and I have to comment on the thing about dumping all this money into K-12. The problem is that it wasn't distributed equitably. And that's, to Danica's point, I've been advocating for a while and I think the former Senator Jayapal, when she was in the state Senate, put forward a bill a few years ago to actually do an equity analysis of every funding bill. And that hasn't been done. And the Cleary decision did not distribute the money equitably. I mean, I can tell you that, for example, Issaquah and Lake Washington, very wealthy parts of the state got more money per student additional than Tukwila, which is 90% students of color, 75% free and reduced lunch, 40% ELL students. So it wasn't distributed equitably. But I wanted to come back to the counselor, and because I think that's key to implementing this new state funding program, is one of the things that's not funded adequately nor equitably is high school counselors. And I know in our district, at our high school, we have a career and technical counselor we have one, not funded by the state, funded locally, and she is just overwhelmed. And it sounds to me like you just added to her job because, lots of options are good, but they can be completely overwhelming, particularly if you're talking about families who have not been in the education system before and are trying to figure all this stuff out. We're going to need a lot more counselors to help them figure all this stuff out. And so the problem, the way the state funds counselors, first of all, they're underfunding them, number one, kind of everybody agrees on that. And number two, they fund it the same for everybody. So Mercer Island, where, vast majority of the families have been to college, they can figure out the system, no problem. They get the same allocation for counselors at high school as Tukwila, which has, huge number of students coming from families who have never been to school. So, that's, this education funding system, I know you're not on K-12, so it's not your bailiwick, but in order for this to be successful and really take full advantage, the education funding system is going to have to be, funded in a much more equitable way. Otherwise, we're just going to some good things may happen, but a lot of students will not figure it out and not be able to figure it out. And to Danica's point about the study about the one-on-one, so where do these one-on-ones come from? Well, they have to be funded. So
yeah. No, I think both those points are well taken. I just don't have control over the K-12 budget to the same level that I do over the higher ed budget, but I agree. I'd love to see a lot more counselors. I'd love to overfund counselors in historically under-resourced districts. I think what you're saying makes perfect sense.
So thank you for the patience for the person on the live who has a question, which is when should parents be applying for the College Bound Scholarship?
Before the end of the 8th grade year, so anytime in 7th and 8th grade. And that will, some of this is certainly not a fix for the high school counselor funding problem that you mentioned, but we just signed a contract with a vendor so that we can start texting college-bound students at certain critical times, and we're communicating with them throughout their middle and high school careers, years, and we also do training of the high school counselors that we do have. The tour that you just mentioned, the high school counselor training, just happened across the state for several weeks, and so we do a lot of webinars, et cetera, to make it easier to understand financial aid and academic pathways and how to apply so that they can help students.
Was there a bill, am I correct, was there a bill to extend the College Bound to 9th grade?
For some students that missed the opportunity
Okay, yeah, it is.
in 7th and 8th grade, but it's not all.
And ideally with college grant, it won't matter so much anymore,
Right.
right? I mean, so, like, God willing, it's all going to be one big happy system.
Right.
Did you?
I do have a question, actually. So I was wondering if you could speak more about any interaction and trainings you might have with nonprofits, community-based organizations who work with populations, adult education, in workforce or workforce trainings, as well as youth programs who work with first-generation students who have very, very little knowledge about pathways to college education.
So I want to make sure. No, so are you asking what's currently happening
Do you
to hold the partnerships together in that
Yes.
way in support of the student? I think that there's been this shift in philosophy as a community college system whole, because I think we used to operate siloed away from our partnerships. And you had mentioned that hunger was a huge component and reality of the lives of our students. So with that, with the housing instability, students who are parents, all of those wraparound services that need to happen also require that individuals like us who sit in these chairs need to also get in the room and really begin doing that partnership work. I know across the system that has been really a conversation that has emerged. Campus by campus, there have been strategies implemented in that way. There's been some that have begun as part of some of sort of, like, for example, the age-old workforce policies that require that partnership of sorts, but not to the level and to the degree that we really need to do that work. So yes, I think I can confidently say that there is that focus that's happening. It varies from campus to campus, but we have begun to realize the critical aspects of that. One of the things that, in bringing up the hunger piece, the WACS group that I mentioned before, the student leaders across all 34 colleges, on their ledge agenda coming forth again this year is the piece around establishing the use of and accepting SNAP benefits on campus. So that's one endeavor that helps to integrate some of these services together.
Question from our executive director, which is what are the action items we can all work on together to increase access for students of color, especially our non-traditional students of color?
So I think we all, look, I mean, we're all advocates for these issues, right? That's why we're in this room. And I think if we can all work together to increase awareness of the New Washington College grant, I think that's going to be a huge one, right? And I want to see if we can finagle some Gates money or some other foundation money to like run ads on buses and like just really do a broad-based broadcast of this. I think because the money's there, but obviously it doesn't do anyone any good if you know, for whatever reason people aren't aware of it, or you know, the barriers are too big and the FAFSA is too hard and we don't have enough counselors. But I think all working together to say, okay, this money, you can go to college, you know, you can pursue an apprenticeship, tuition free, if families in certain pain under this new bill, go, you know, dream high, dream big, and us all like pushing that message and getting awareness out there. That strikes me as a big one, but maybe that's just because I'm narrowly focused on this thing right now. There's probably a bunch else we can do.
I agree, and I think just to follow that, because it's the same topic, is that to access that grant, it's FAFSA WASFA, and that's one thing that I think all the partners you mentioned, all the schools, all the folks around the table can all rally around, because no matter which student you or prospective student you're working with, they're going to need to file one of those forms. So we can all work together, because it's not the most horrific form in the world.
But it's bad.
But
it's
it
bad,
needs-
right?
folks
I mean,
need
and we
help.
can't control it because it's
Yep.
federally set,
Yep.
right? Which is really frustrating. So
Yep.
yeah.
So it takes some expertise
Yeah.
to help families with how to answer those questions. So it's not just spreading awareness that you got to do this thing, but helping people get through it. And we can help others understand the form so that communities can rally around families to fill it out. And then all the information that goes with it.
I think a critical piece too, you use the word scandal in reference to sort of that elite admission scandal, but I was thinking, I heard it differently. I was thinking how scandalous we've been touting ourselves as open door policy campuses, when what we've done is, if we've been able to provide outreach to communities of color who are low income, our ability to not establish a revolving door for those students has been terrible. We've done so wrong by our students that it hurts my stomach to think about how complicit I was at the front lines to do that, and currently the mistakes I've made to continue to maintain that in our system. So I think of that scandalous, and part of it is too, when we recruit and provide access in this way, what are we doing all the way through to the end to get to that tipping point? What classrooms, environments, learning environments are we putting these students in? Someone had mentioned curriculum. You know, we've begun just this absolutely fabulous project to take apart all of our high school plus modules and courses, overhauled with a rubric that is centered in racial equity and social justice orientation and UDL practices. It's been an appalling outcome. So what that means is we are entirely overhauling that, which is going to cost us twice the amount that we predicted. And that's just one little project that we're doing in this tiny little area over here. Imagine system-wide if instructors of color came into the classroom for one, to tip that a bit, but also curriculum that started with this rubric instead of having to go backwards and overhaul. So I think about what we're doing when we're saying, hey, come to us, and then we're going to do terrible by you. So what's our responsibility in the classroom, in the chairs that we sit, to continue to talk about how we retain that. But I do want to say one thing. We are tipping the point a little bit. At the highest chair of our institutions, we now have 15, almost half of our chancellors and presidents are individuals of color. So that's 15 out of 34, almost half. And then we've got almost 8 of our colleges majority minority students of color. So there is that tipping that's happening, and the conversation is alive and well. The equity efforts across the system. Jan also has launched out a new, very explicit vision that says we are leading with racial equity. Those are the first 4 words of our vision. So very clear, very explicit.
I think I would just piggyback on what Ha said, is that, like, I think leading with race and adopting like an equity or anti-racist lens is like one of the most critical pieces as like an action step that folks can take within their organizations, within their own practice, or in advocating for at a higher level. Because I think I think that's so critical, because I think that allows you to examine your practices on a deeper level and explore the language that you're using in, in promoting, like, for all students to like file or to go to college, because I think that if we're using targeted language specifically for folks of color, it's a way to provide inclusivity, and I think that using empowering practices that support students of color also should empower the staff members of color in the different agencies, because I think too often if we're using kind of just like broad general language, we don't realize we're actually like excluding people, or folks in the room don't actually feel welcome or at the table when we're saying words like all or everybody. Because to kind of circle back, when we're thinking about higher education in general, those institutions were not built for everybody. That's not the system that we have set up. And so it takes very, very intentional language, very specific like dismantling of structures whenever possible to make way for more inclusivity, and like calling out folks that have not historically been welcomed on campus.
To piggyback off of that, and then I'll move on to you, Bernal, is there a financial threshold for the college bound, and is there a way to stay in the college bound if your parents received a living raise that wasn't enough for financial hope for college, but enough to change their status?
There is a financial cutoff for college bound to apply for it when you are in 7th and 8th grade, which is essentially the same as eligibility for free and reduced price lunch, or anyone that participates in TANF or any foster youth. Then when the student gets to college, it, just like Washington College Grant or Pell Grant, will use the financial aid application to recheck income every year. So if a family income changes just a little bit, you may not get college bound, but you might get Washington College Grant. The following year, you might get even more. So it's rechecked every year. Representative Hansen mentioned earlier that the Washington College Grant went to the state's median family income, which is, just using rough numbers, about $92,000 for a family of 4. So many more families are going to get something in terms of financial aid. Might be just enough to cover a book and a half that you mentioned earlier, or it might be more in terms of tuition.
Yeah, I want to kind of just give a shout out, I guess, to some individuals in here and organizations that, first of all, with Hot sitting on the panel and the advocacy year that's coming out of the state board, I'd like to also point out that Jan Yoshiwara is a Japanese American who has a really proud history with her grandmother. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but she's got a great. And I want to shout out to the state board, Arlen Harris, who, Arlen, white man who came to the racial equity team and not only advocated for the team, but convinced his organization to be a member. They're the only higher ed group that's a member of the racial equity team. And I want to point that out, that it took this white guy right here to
I say he's pretty fly for a white guy.
and to advocate for that, because I want to let you know that we need allies. The state board also produced one of not the best, I can't say that, because they're all the best, but we have student interns, and Daniela Suarez was our one this last year that came from the state board, and now she's a trustee at the University of Washington. So she's on the board of trustees at the UW, which really get the system working. And then finally, our good representative here, who is a regular at the racial equity team meetings. He comes to these meetings, and you've heard him in action here, how he can be so passionate for what we do. And we worked on that DREAM Act. You wouldn't see a more passionate person coming from the state legislature, coming to our meetings with our racial equity team with 15 to 25 people coming to those meetings. So it's the collective, and we're reaching out as much as we can to Rochelle, who is here and part of advocating for our students. So it takes a bigger web, and I'm pleased to hear that the state board has, through the system, have over half of chancellors and presidents. I mean, that's a phenomenal statistic. It really is. So I think you also need to hear that part of this puzzle, because we need that every time we go to the state legislature, to have these advocates there, put these people in place, and then go forward. Thank you for letting me add.
No, Reno, thank you.
So I do have another question. Is remediation in community colleges covered by the free college tuition program?
You
Yes.
can take up to a
Right.
year
Yes.
of below college level. If you're taking adult basic education where it's $25, that is not covered. But once you're enrolled in a program, you can take classes that are developmental remediation below 100 level.
I would also add on that, that with the guided pathways work, there's been a real intent focus on how our colleges have developed and sustained these remedial coursework, because what we have found is that it's been sort of the graveyard for students. So it's extensive, they stay much too long in that series, and then what happens is they leave. So with that, looking at how basic skills and Dev Ed can collapse, so that pathway is much shorter, gets students through faster and further, as opposed to being a graveyard to put our students in.
Do we have any more questions?
I have one comment to make that I forgot to. And this is in regard of homeless students. SERC has been working with the coalition of the University of Washington, about 23 coalitions, I assume. And one of the challenges for some of the homeless students who sleep on their van, on their cars, is a shower. I mean, that's also something that really resonates to most of them. They can sleep in their cars, but when they wake up in the morning, I think they want to go to descent, and that also has been a challenge. Somehow, we have to look into community colleges they can find shower. We already did work with coalition, with our coalition at the University of Washington for those people to take their bikes. They allocated a space and also a shower for them before they went to class or to work their required jobs. And that's also an issue that has to be looked at.
We did a bill on that. It's an Emily Randall bill. It's a good bill from specifically targeted towards homeless services for homeless students. Very powerful testimony in committee, particularly on the issue of showers. Very powerful. It's probably not enough money. It's certainly not enough money, but we'll see. But totally agree. Like at the community college system in particular, that's a gigantic issue. So you're totally right to raise it.
Yes.
While we're talking about the homeless students, one of the issues I've been working is a little different twist on it. So a couple of our students who were experiencing homelessness when they left high school went to the University of Washington, and but they each have different stories. But one of them got the college bound scholarship and got the tuition paid for, but she didn't get her room and board paid for. And what the University of Washington did was give her loans. So what you're talking about is putting a loan on a homeless student. Not a good idea. And so this student actually, after a year and a half, dropped out. So now you're sitting with the worst possible scenario, no degree and a debt load.
Yep.
And so I know you've actually passed, because I worked with SAC Legends on this, to have a bill to at least have the room and board covered for homeless students, so that we aren't putting debt loads on homeless students, which is a horrible thing to do. But hopefully, and it sounds like with the new funding system, that she'll have more options, so that may not be an issue anymore. I'm not sure.
Right. She'll have a little bit of help from Pell. That may be enough for room and board. I don't know, actually. Might not.
Okay,
So
that's what's kind of my question. So that still may be an issue. I still think
probably.
we shouldn't be putting debt loads on homeless students.
And as a reminder, a lot of undocumented students experience homelessness as well, and most undocumented students are not eligible for loans, and there's plenty of folks who are not eligible for the WASFA either. So it's really complicated when we're talking about the folks who have the highest barriers for overcoming.
Yeah, we had my other story for the homeless student was she was undocumented. So the good news was she got the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship, went to the University of Washington. She didn't have a debt load because she couldn't, because of a federal loan. So fortunately for us, we have light rail that goes between Tukwila and the University of Washington, so she could do it that way, but she missing out on the experience of living on campus and all that. So.
Well, one of the things at Tacoma Community College, innovative programming, they partnered with Tacoma Housing Authority to save slots and units of housing for low-income students at Tacoma Community College. So that's one innovative program that is starting to get some legs under it. But I would agree with you. That's certainly something, but it does illustrate the partnership piece with other stakeholders. And I've dropped the seed. I don't know if it's gone anywhere, but we do provide housing for international students and athletes. How do we now maybe think about setting aside some units for students who may suffer housing instability? So I don't know how far that's gone, but I would love to see it come to fruition.
Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation today, and just wanted to share with folks, in case folks weren't aware, we've been working, like Mercy and I'm Kyla, and we're from the Puget Sound College and Career Network, and we've been working with hundreds of folks across the region over the last couple of years to develop a King County Promise. And what we're really trying to do with that model is model what a more equitable, more supportive advising structure would be at the K-12 in community-based organizations and at higher ed could look like, so we can really model what we really need to invest in to serve students who are most underserved currently, and then also do some big systems improvement as well as some funding directly to students for things that are not covered currently by financial aid. So really grateful for the Washington College Grant and trying to supplement that with additional resources as needed for students that have the lowest income. But some really powerful work that's happening in coalition with lots of folks in the region, and so excited to engage lots more people. If you're interested at all, come find us afterwards. We're happy to share more and would love to connect more with this group as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that is it for today. I wanted to start off by thanking our panelists so much for coming in and answering the questions. Thank you. And then also for our audience members for being here. You guys are what makes this possible. I did want to plug that the Equity Education Coalition, is having a conference October 27th through the 29th, Decolonizing Education, Anti-Racism Towards Equity in Public Education. Public school, sorry. So we do have postcards if you want to take one. All the information is on there. You can check out our Facebook page, our conference website. Registration is almost at capacity, so if you do want to attend, please get your tickets now, or you might be out of luck, which would suck. And so for that, because of the conference, we will not have a lunch and learn next month. We are a 4-person team putting on a 200-person conference, so we're really busy with that. So next month, we will not be here, unfortunately. And with that also, we have a lunch and learn survey. It's one question. We just want to know in our next coming year, what lunch and learns have we not done that you really want to see? And we have quite a few responses so far, but we're still wanting to hear from people as we put together our upcoming year's schedule for lunch and learn. So thank you so much. Please sign in if you didn't, so you can get this information. And thank you.